Thanks for the introduction. Appreciate the opportunity to visit with you today. I'm Jim Mintert, former director of the Center for Commercial Agriculture. I'm now an emeritus professor at Purdue University in the Department of Agricultural Economics. I'm pleased to be here and visit with you a little bit. If you haven't had a chance to take the survey, go ahead and shoot that code with your phone. And I think we've got maybe a half a dozen questions or so. We're going to use responses to the survey during the course of the presentation. So we'll be showing those results live as we work through the presentation, as we talk about what we're going to discuss with respect to precision agriculture and technology. So with that, I want to start off a little bit, though, talking a little bit of background. About 10 years ago, my colleague, Dr. Langemeier, and I started a project jointly with the CME group called the Ag Economy Barometer, where we survey farmers across the nation every month to learn more about their perspectives on the ag economy and on what's taking place on their own farming operation with respect to profitability and just get an idea as to what people are thinking. That survey is done every month, and we release the results on the first Tuesday of every month. And it so happened that worked out that we're actually in the process of releasing those results live on the internet as we speak. So I'm going to show you some of those results going back to 2015 and show you this month's results as well. So here's the overall sentiment index, and that sentiment index is based on 5 questions that we ask. This really mirrors what the University of Michigan has been doing for decades with respect to consumers, except we just talk to farmers and we've adapted their methodology to the farm audience. So there's the sentiment index going back to 2015. The current reading this month, 152, that's up 11 points in February and up 64 points since September. So in the aggregate, corn, soybean, wheat, cotton farmers, people that raise beef cattle, people that raise hogs, and people that have a dairy operation have become markedly more optimistic about what's going on in the ag economy in the U.S. and what's going on their own farms than what they were telling us last August and September. So a big turnaround and improvement in sentiment. A lot of that, most of that occurred after the November election. So people have become much more optimistic since the November election. We saw this back in 2016 and early 2017 as well, when people became much more optimistic, expecting things to get better. We decompose those results into a current condition index and an index of future expectations. And until this month, the big improvement in sentiment was really about people thinking it was going to get better in the future. That's the green line on that chart, that index of future expectations. And it really took off. It started to take off in October, which our survey was done just a couple of weeks before the election in October, and then continued in November, December, and carried over here into the early part of 2025. This month, the index of current conditions really took off, jumping 28 points in February, and that's up 61 points since September. And before we started here today, we were talking about what's happened with respect to corn and soybean prices and wheat prices these last few weeks. Our survey in February was done the week of February 10 to February 14. The grain markets did look better then than they do today. So the results for March are probably going to be different. We're going to be doing the March survey next week. I'm thinking things could look a little different, but people became quite a bit more optimistic about that current situation as well as the future expectations. Then one of the questions we ask is about investments on their farming operation, and that really ties into what we want to talk about here today. That investment index has been kind of sideways for much of the last couple of years, but really started to improve again last fall. And this month in February was up 11 points. That's a big move for that index, and it's up 24 points since September. That Farm Capital Investment Index is based on a question that says, do you think now is a good time or a bad time to make large investments in your farming operation? And a reading of 59 is clearly not as good as we got back in, say, 2021, when that index topped out over 90, when people were pretty optimistic about investments in agriculture and in their farming operation. But a reading of 59, as you look at that chart, is one of the most optimistic readings we've had over the last 3 years. And so that was a little bit of a surprise to us, but it told us that people were ready to make some investments if they thought the returns are going to be there. And of course, that picture might change a little bit when we do the March survey, but that's what people were telling us just a few weeks ago. Michael?
One caveat on that chart, Jim, is the index is below 100, meaning there's more people think it's a bad time than a good time, but certainly it has improved recently. Now let's talk a little bit about where technology fits. There's essentially 5 managerial levers a farmer can pull. Two of these related to gross revenue, obviously output price, changing your marketing strategy a little bit or working, trying to get an optimal marketing strategy. There's also yields. Of course, that's very important. Technology can impact those, of course. Also costs, manage how much it costs you to produce. And again, technology can fit into that piece. And then I want to go to the far right here, or my far right anyway. Manage the people that help you with the four levers above. And so certainly the labor situation on your farm, having someone responsible for HR if you have several people on the farm, making sure that things run smoothly. The bucket that we're going to be talking about today is the asset side. And so technology can have a large impact on what your balance sheet looks like, but it also can impact these other levers, in particular yield and cost. And we'll talk more about that here in a little bit.
So we've done several research projects over recent years to learn more about why people adopt technology and what impact it has on their farming operation. And so the results I'm going to show you here in the next few minutes are based on some survey work we did several years ago with a couple of my colleagues at Purdue, looking at precision ag technologies. And we sorted people that responded to our surveys into some buckets. And I'm showing you the first two buckets on the slide there, the non-adopters of technology and what we called passive adopters. And a non-adopter is pretty self-explanatory. A passive adopter is someone who has adopted a technology just because it was embedded in a piece of equipment that they already acquired. So the classic case there is maybe you weren't really using a yield monitor before, but you picked up either a new combine or in a case of this operation in that size category, maybe a used combine that already had a yield monitor in it. And so it's got a yield monitor. You wind up collecting the data, you wind up looking at the data and maybe using it a little bit. So those are folks that are passive adopters. They're really not adopting technology because they're seeking new technology, because they're seeking new information. They're seeking new ways to monitor and manage their operation. They're just doing it because, well, it's there, okay? So if you look at the next couple of buckets, those are folks that are more aggressively interested in managing their operation in a way that they weren't doing it before. These are folks that are actively seeking some new technology to make their farms more productive and to try and improve their productivity. So you can see how we sorted the buckets there on the data user side, yield monitors, GPS yield maps, GPS guidance, and maybe starting to do some analysis of the data that they've collected on their own computer, either at home or with someone else. And then the information seekers are the folks who I maybe would characterize as folks who are early adopters. First movers is a terminology that gets used a lot. When a new technology becomes available, they want to jump on it and try it as soon as they can get their hands on it and try and use that going forward. One of the things that we observed, particularly in those last two categories, but especially those information seekers, one of the ways that they were gathering information and improving productivity was their willingness not only to analyze data on a computer, and in most cases that probably was somebody on the farm, but also the ability and willingness to share data with someone else. And one of the keys that we observed in our surveys was that people who were willing to share data and manage data more aggressively, spend more time managing that data, extracting information to try and improve their operation, were gaining more from the technology. And so thinking about it going forward, one of the things you want to think about is your willingness to share data with other people, whether it be a service provider, whether it be a peer group. The idea that you can just use data from your own farm to make your improved decision-making, from our perspective, is probably a mistake. You probably need to be thinking more broadly than that to gather information from other farms and use that as well as information gathered on your own farm. So looking more at some of the research we've done, I want to explain this chart first, and then I'll show you where folks kind of wind up on it. So the chart suggests that the green line would indicate for a given level of inputs, if you're on the green line, you're getting the most out of those inputs, right? So at any given level of inputs, if you're on the green line, you've really maxed out what is possible or what's attainable with respect to the efficient usage of those inputs. And we've got output on bushels per acre as an example on that vertical axis. So if you look at the next one, how do you characterize the efficiency of those people in those different groups? The non-adopters are clearly not capitalizing on possible efficiency gains associated with using precision technology. They're the least efficient. Passive adopters are a little more efficient than the non-adopters, but not much. And then when you look at the data users and the information seekers, they're pretty close. So who could gain the most from adopting new technology, new precision ag technology? Well, clearly it's the folks that haven't adopted anything. And secondly, the folks that have maybe done some passive adoption, but really haven't taken advantage of everything that's out there. So that's who could gain the most. And Chad's got some other research he's going to share with you later that kind of supports that idea. And then the second point is, do you need to be that first mover? Do you need to be that person that's the first one to adopt a new technology? And our research would suggest that maybe you don't. Maybe you can wait a little while, but not too long, but wait a little while to make sure that other people have confirmed that this technology does have some benefits, not just a one-off kind of a situation. Because if you look at our research, the gain of being that first mover was pretty darn small. And in fact, you've taken on more risk by doing that. And if you think about it, I think back to an old farm management axiom, which is neither be the first to try the new, nor the last to cast aside the old. That's kind of the idea here, right? You want to monitor what's going on. You want to pay attention. You want to be aware of the new technologies, but you don't have to be the very first. But you want to be following along pretty closely if something looks like it's going to work.
The caveat to that, Jim, and I'm not disagreeing here, but it's the information seekers that make that curve move up over time. And so that's early adopters that push that curve up over time. And so that's why they're doing it, is they're hoping there's enough gain to push that frontier up. But you're all right. There is risk associated with being that early adopter.
All right, so we're going to jump to the results that you guys said. All right, so this is the question about, do you use data to make decisions? So I farmed with my family for a while, and so this puzzle over technology adoption is something that maybe I was the one who said maybe we should talk about this as a group, but ultimately kind of grew up in the age of when precision ag technologies was really taking off, and I actually was an undergrad in sort of some of the early classes around it. And so this idea that we're moving towards using data to make decisions, obviously this group is really heavy into using the data that you collect to make decisions for your farm. So this one I think is a really interesting question, because I love that there is certainty in this room that you believe that, yes, you are using technology to make your farms more profitable. This was an open question for me. And I think probably so maybe I'm the only one interested in this topic, but one of the things that really drove my concern over technology adoption was I was really struggling to identify what things made me more profitable. So I love the fact that we do have a few people in here who are probably more in my camp, that I'm not really sure how technology benefits me. But I love the fact that we've got a lot of certainty here. So let me jump back to these slides.
This is a very important slide. I like to tell my students that. And so unfortunately, we're not going to have a quiz at the end. If we did, this slide would be on there. And so when you think about technologies, I'm not going to pretend that this is really simple. And you need to ask a series of questions here. Do you resist technology adoption? Do you wait a long time before you adopt technologies? That's the thing you have to talk about. Are you leaving some money on the ground or on the table by doing that? Does your farm community love or resist technology adoption? Maybe this is the family situation. Does the rest of your family members not like to pay a lot for this new technology? Who are you talking to about farm technology? Are they the right people? Obviously, you're probably talking about input providers, but you're talking about others in your community that have adopted similar technology. Has it worked for them? Could technology allow us to farm more acres with the current machinery? This is something we've been doing for a long time, for decades. You're buying larger machinery and saving on labor. And that leads me to the next point. Does technology lower our labor efficiency and productivity? If we're spending a lot of money on technology and our machinery investment per acre is really high, are we relatively efficient on labor, and vice versa? If we're using older technology, is that helping us on labor? Those usually go in the opposite direction. So looking at labor efficiency and productivity and looking at machinery investment per acre is really important. Another thing to think about, When we're thinking about strategy, we're either thinking about low-cost producer or product differentiation, producing higher value crops. Does technology allow us to grow higher value crops? Is the information we're collecting there valuable to producing some higher value crops? And that could be as simple as popcorn or waxy corn, something like that. Could technology change our crop rotations and mixes? Can we use technology to think about our crop rotation? And then I think Jim added this one here because he's semi-retired here. Could technology get us to Florida sooner after harvest to spend more time at the lake? I think for Jim, it'd be golfing.
Especially Florida.
Yeah. Okay, so we put in that last bullet point kind of facetiously, but ultimately, one of the things that has become really apparent, especially in this, we're living it right now with the corn and soybean prices, but is ultimately all those decisions about what technologies we adopt and how much we're willing to spend rolls up into a bushel of corn or a bushel of soybeans or a bushel of wheat. And so as we're thinking about how do we adopt those technologies, I've got some students sitting up here that were in my class. A lot of times what we do as ag economists is train people how to do these partial budgeting exercises where we identify what are the costs and what are the benefits of everything. So kind of as we've talked through this presentation, we said, well, what are the simple questions, right, that we could ask around what technology is doing for us, or what are these specific technologies doing? So the first one we put is, will the technology increase the bushels, right? And this is a simple yes, no, and how many more? And I'll get to a point on how many more in a little bit. But the second one being, will technology decrease my cost of production? And so if it does, if overlap, right, the key, or at least the poster child here is guidance and helping us with overlap, right? If we save that time, it's going to decrease our costs. Will the technology allow me to manage my operation better? So one of the things that came out that, Jim, you didn't talk about was this perception of convenience. You want to say anything about that?
Yeah, so one of the things that did come out in our surveys of producers with respect to technology adoption is one of the reasons people adopt some technologies is just because it's more convenient, right? And a classic case, and if you visit with some of the companies that provide this technology, one of the classic cases was guidance. The initial thought process with respect to guidance was it was going to be all about efficiency. And you've probably all seen discussions and maybe thought about some of this with respect to more efficient uses of inputs, whether it be seed or spraying. But a big reason why people adopted it was because it just made life easier. It just made life simpler, right? And so one less thing to worry about. Maybe that allows you to be a little more productive in terms of spending more hours in the field, but still largely about making life a little simpler, a little easier. And that's a factor.
There's sort of an indirect benefit, right? If the convenience allows us to be better managers and we could potentially get a higher price, output price, lower our cost of production, or just do things a little bit better, that could also indirectly impact sort of how we assess the technology. And then the last point, and this is a point where, I'll be transparent. Like, I liked technology, right? Like I got some joy out of kind of knowing what was new and trying new things. And so there's a component too where we can say, well, I actually want to do this, right? This makes my life a little bit better. I enjoy it. But this last point, this question 4 of, but how far can we go in pursuit of this better life if our ultimate goal is to make our living producing commodities? And so in this case, what I have there is, if yes, how much are you willing to pay for a better life, right? These are applicable reasons why you could choose to adopt technologies. So we kind of at the bottom here, if you add up the yes amounts and subtract the costs and it's positive, go for it, right? If this thing leans in the positive direction, let's go ahead and adopt.
Chad, many times it's harder to measure the benefits than the costs. And so when we talk about this in class, what I tell students to do, I talk a lot about risk in class. When I talk about this in class, do what-if analysis. How many bushels would I need to save in order to pay for the technology? How much lower would my cost of production need to be in order to adopt this technology? And so I think that's how we can approach thinking about the benefits.
So I made this really cool slide. Basically just says everything that I just said on the last slide, but trying to highlight this fact that we if we're looking at evaluating technologies, we're going to have to look for, where are we going to get more money out of this technology, right? And so I put down there more bushels or lower costs being these direct effects. But then if it potentially makes us a better manager, it gives us more time, and that leads us to higher prices, that could be a great indirect effect, right? And ultimately, we got to get to how do we quantify these numbers? So I put on the last point here is this better life component. And I think as economists, that's a perfectly viable thing. If you can put a number to what's the sort of enjoyment that I get out of these technologies, that's a great way to think about it. So I'm going to shift now, because what we tend to do as economists and what we train students is we do these exercises, right? These partial budget exercises. Is anybody looking at this chart overwhelmed? Thanks for a couple chuckles. That helps. I would say I am, right? So we're going to switch again back to these Mentimeter questions. This is a great example of, why don't you give us the history on this?
So this was actually a spreadsheet prepared by a couple of our former colleagues, Michael and I, and it's extremely detailed. It's extremely accurate. To use it, you would have to fill in every one of those blue boxes, okay? And if you do, and you've got a good grip on what all those values are, you're going to get some really good information with respect to whether or not you should purchase a self-propelled sprayer. We're not aware of very many people that actually have the level of detail available that allows them to fill in accurately all those blue boxes. So the question is, can you step back from that a little bit and still wind up making good decisions? And we contend you can.
Okay, so this question was to get at another point here. So when evaluating a new technology, how confident are you in your ability to estimate the potential benefits? We got a lot of people in this confident and somewhat confident, and then there's kind of a tapering through the neutral and the somewhat not confident. So the benefits, it looks like we're pretty good at this. The same trend holds here when we're thinking about costs. So when we get into this, and I think this would be my argument lots of times with farm audiences, is you inherently and intuitively do the process of partial budgeting on a regular basis. This is you're very comfortable making these decisions. One of the things though that I would challenge is here, let's go back. If we think about this spreadsheet, very few of us are probably comfortable with this level of detail. And so one of the things that I've wondered about is if the reasons that you're not choosing to do an exercise like this is because you're not feeling confident in your ability to identify the costs or the benefits, our encouragement to you is you're doing this already. This is something that's coming really natural as you're making decisions throughout the time. So maybe the encouragement is to document that, or to work with someone else to try to verify, are my costs and my benefits, do they seem appropriate? I remember sitting at the kitchen table with my dad and brother doing this kind of an exercise, and I wish we would have went through and kind of layered things in a more sort of formal way. And then I'll be honest, the other thing is we probably overestimated the benefits on a regular basis because we wanted them to look positive, right? Like there was that better life component. We were like, hey, we want to make sure that we can, I don't know, get this new toy. The last thing I bought was tracks on a planner. And like, it was so much fun having tracks on a planner. I don't know why. I can't tell you why it was, but it was a great thing. And so I think I remember doing this exercise, and I think my thumb was a little on the positive scale, as opposed to getting back to it and saying, well, there's an appropriate amount of money that we could say we just want tracks on a planner. That's something we want to do, and not have that exercise be weighted on we are a little too aggressive on the potential benefits.
Michael, you were talking earlier this morning when we were discussing this about the idea that you want to approach this from kind of a net present value perspective. You might want to share a little of that.
Well, obviously, when you're talking about a sprayer, you're going to use that sprayer for several years, and those benefits occur over time. And so those benefits in year 7 are not the same as the benefits in year 1. And so you just discounting, discounting those future values back to today is very helpful when you're doing this analysis, particularly with the benefits. The costs, a lot of the costs are there's some costs that are spread over time, but certainly the cost of the sprayer, those kinds of things, you know those right away, and so those aren't quite as hard to think through. And that's why I was saying quite often when I talk about these kinds of things, the benefits are harder. it's harder to estimate those benefits. But my response to that is just come up with a first guesstimate and then do some what ifs. What if my benefits are 10%, not as good as I thought they're going to be, or 10% better, and just see what it looks like.
So with those partial budgeting exercises, there's these indirect effects that we talked about potentially being a better manager. And we're going to kind of go through some of these other indirect things because they become very difficult in trying to assess what are the costs and benefits when there's things that exist that are difficult for us to identify. So this is a research project I worked on with folks down at Kansas State. And we looked at farmers who participate in the Kansas Farm Management Association and looked at their adoption of technology and how it related to their efficiency in generating gross revenue. So instead of looking specifically just at their bushels per acre, we were looking at how can you take your mix of inputs and turn them into gross revenue. And so the most fascinating thing, and this was a series of farms that responded multiple times to this same data set. And so one of the things that came out of it is we never saw a negative impact on technology, negative impact on efficiency from adopting technology, right? The technology always paid its way. It always made up for whatever cost it had and some benefits. And the places where we did see efficiency gains were when there was multiple precision ag technologies bundled together. So in this case, this is using technologies that existed since 2002, right? So we're talking yield monitors, guidance, grid soil sampling, things like that. When you put those packages together, we were able to see that the farms did advance sort of in their ability to make gross revenue with their inputs. The thing that was the most interesting to us, though, and it really ties into Jim's story in the survey, is that the least efficient farms were really the farms that were driving the efficiency gains. So when we took it and we looked at the farms in different buckets, the lowest efficiency farms, the farms with the most amount of inputs for their output, when they adopted technology, they saw the biggest gain. So Michael, you kind of talked about that a little bit this morning on your thoughts on what we think we're seeing there.
We see the same thing when we look at productivity differences across countries. It's called catching up. Those that are struggling, once they adopt that technology, it's like they leapfrog. That their gap in productivity increases rather dramatically. I think that's exactly what we're seeing with these farm level results.
Yep. So this next one's it's kind of gotten me in a little bit of trouble, but it didn't mean it to. We did a project looking at autonomy, right? As we think about what is the future of farming row crops and looking at autonomy, we built a model of there's a long history at Purdue of using sort of linear programming models to model farm management. And so we adapted that model and used autonomous machines instead of people driving the machines. And so there's a lot of assumptions baked into this model. The thing that seems to be driving the autonomous conversation, at least for our group, is around labor challenges. And so that's what we're trying to look at is when does that tipping point happen when the labor costs become high enough that running autonomous machines would be good. And the assumptions behind this is that every operation in corn and soybean production is autonomous. And we're doing it with this idea of large machines instead of we have colleagues who work with small or medium-sized machines and many machines in a swarm. This was looking at what if we just take all of our operations with large tractors, large combines, and make them autonomous. So a lot of setup there to say what we found is that right now at $30 an hour in our model, there's never a scenario where autonomy is better than having labor do the work. Now, there's probably a few of you out here who are saying we probably hit $30 an hour already on labor with whatever we're paying in benefits and taxes. And so our hope is to go further and try to figure out where that break point is. However, the grad student that I worked with he said we're not even close yet, right? So what I can tell you is at $30 an hour, it's never under our assumptions. The thing that is fairly interesting is, though, that the autonomy does make it possible to farm more acres with the same machines, right? So you can take and you can extend the same machinery set and you can do more acres because you're not the one physically operating the machines. All right, so we wanted to ask this question of when we're thinking about these technologies and how technologies are going to impact the farming operation, one of the things we wanted to get to is what's the farm's strategy, the long-term strategy of the farm on how you're going to be successful. And so we put in, these are my buckets. There's other buckets, and someone brought up another a good idea here. But, are you going to win in the future because you're going to have low input costs? You're going to have low overhead costs. You're going to be a diversified farm. You have a really strong land base, and that's going to support sort of the operations in the future, and then use the best technology. So we kind of define these as these potential strategies.
So this is where we, in our discussion, said, well, what problem are we trying to solve? What is the farm's root problem, and what data would you need to make better decisions about that root problem? Is the problem the fact that yields aren't as good as you think they should be relative to your neighbors, what you're hearing from other producers, what you're looking at with respect to county or state averages? Is it the fact that you think your cost per bushel are too high? Is there a problem with respect to harvesting? One of the things we talked about was a kind of a classic farm management problem where somebody says, well, we need more harvest capacity, so we need either a bigger combine or perhaps a second combine. And as soon as they do that, they realize they just created a new problem, which is we don't have enough hauling capacity to get the crop away from the combine. And then when they fix that problem, they realize that, well, the grain system, the leg doesn't have sufficient capacity to handle all those trucks that are showing up. And when they fix that and get a new leg that has more capacity, they realize the dryer can't keep up. So the question is, what is the root problem, and what are you trying to solve, and what data do you need to do a better job of making that decision? And then from a technology standpoint, as you look at these individual technologies, what problem is that technology designed to solve, and how does that solving that problem actually contribute to your long-term success?
This has been the part that we tried to hone in on, is how can we marry up these technologies to the strategy which we believe is going to make our farm successful in the future. One of the things that I felt like I observed growing up in a farm community and farming is there were times when the technology adoption didn't really marry up with my perceptions of how these farms were successful in the past, right? There was farms that were really successful at being low input cost farms, and then they were really heavy into technology, and it was always a little bit confusing to me. Is this really the sort of route you want to go, or are you changing sort of farm strategies? And so the questions around what specific task does this technology simplify, and how is it going to impact either the cost or benefits, I think is really important as we think through what is appropriate.
Part of the issue here, Chad, if I may, it's a
Sure.
moving target. Let's say we're focusing really hard on overhead costs, and you buy technology. Well, that short term that might increase some overhead costs, but that same technology allows you to expand. It puts you in a position to expand, which lowering your overhead costs. And so this is something we have to look at over time. Just because we look like we're in really good shape right now in terms of our strategy, we got to continually think about, are we doing the right things? Go back to my right technology slide. Are we using the right technologies?
Yeah, that's a good point, Michael.
So coming back to our survey and actually thinking about some of the research that Chad shared, they actually reached very similar conclusions using completely different approaches. Ours was based on a survey where we asked producers to self-identify where they were at with respect to technology usage and what gains they were getting from that. And again, the people who would benefit the most are the people who have either not adopted any technology or maybe have adopted just a little bit of technology. Those are the biggest gains in terms of productivity. And that was the same thing you showed on the financial side. And then related to what Michael was just talking about, if you think about technology adoption, think about what's taken place in the technology arena over the last roughly decade. Just think for yourself about some of the technologies you've heard about. And some of those technologies that have already fallen by the wayside. Some of those technologies have already fallen by the wayside. And I would contend that in some cases, we were adopting technology for technology's sake without thinking about how is that technology going to solve a problem on this farm. So anytime you adopt a new technology or think about it, is the question you want to ask yourself is, how does this new technology address what I perceive to be a problem on my farm? And be honest about that, right? Because a lot of us think, well, we're doing a great job. All right. Well, you are doing a great job, but is there a way that you could do something better? And would technology help you improve that? But if it doesn't, maybe that's not a technology you want to think about. Maybe that's not one you want to spend much time on, right? So that's one of the challenges we have in terms of figuring out, because, one of the things we thought about before coming to the Classic this year was walking the trade show and thinking about how many technologies you're being bombarded with. I mean, it's amazing, right? And this show has changed over the 10 or so years that we've been coming to it. How many more booths there are with new technologies that they want you to adopt, and how do you sort through that? Well, one way to sort through that is think about, what are the issues on my farm that I think need some kind of improvement or could benefit from some kind of improvement. That helps you sort through a whole bunch of technologies that you're going to be able to push aside and not spend much time thinking about. That's a way to kind of sort through that and then start asking individually, all right, how would that particular technology really address my problem? And then thinking about what Michael was talking about, think about the cost and the benefits, right? And think about, okay, I can't measure these things perfectly. You can't measure the cost perfectly. Maybe, as Michael says, you could probably do a little better job on costs than the benefits, doing the what-if analysis, doing the trade-offs and saying, well, what if I'm too high on the benefits? What if I'm too low on the benefits? How does that sort through? That's the approach that I think we would like to encourage, right?
Yeah, of course. I also think from a producer standpoint, there was a mountain of data that we collected that we didn't use, and we dabbled into it and we tried to do things with it, but I felt like that was a good sort of symptom of the underlying problem, right? That we had adopted technologies that was giving us something that we didn't really know how to engage in a proper way to get value out of it. And so I think there's also a part too where you can think about that. If the product here is collecting a lot of data, what am I going to do with that data to make a decision that's going to impact my cost of production? And I think that's ultimately one of the things that, I've been thinking about after not farming for a while is it all ends up sort of, we're going to sell it in a truckload, right? Somewhere. So kind of our last point, and we're going to have time for questions, which is great. It's just this idea that we believe that the technology, and we have touched on basically precision ag technologies now, as Jim alluded to on the floor. I mean, there are so many options out there for new data sources that could potentially come in, farm management softwares. We didn't even touch that. And so thinking about these are clearly going to be a system together, right? These can't necessarily just be these standalone pieces. I think in a sense that maybe in the past we've been able to assess sort of like, what's the benefit of this tractor? It might be the tractor plus the planter, right? Where we have to start thinking about it. And what about this technology that's providing us data? And then this technology that's using that data to make some sort of decision for our farm. But that all being said that's only part of sort of your larger farm strategy, right? So that technology is in support of the way that you are going to be successful in the future, as opposed to sort of being like the feature component. And we did have on there, one of those options was being really good with tech. So I guess technically we could say that. But ultimately marrying up those ideas of this is how we have won in the past and this is how we want to win in the future. And then how do we support that strategy, farm strategy, with the system of technologies that we're choosing to work with on our farm? Other thoughts, or should we open up to questions?
So maybe as a wrap up, so whether you look at the research that I was doing with some colleagues, which was survey based and people telling us what they were doing and how they perceived the benefits, or you look at the research Chad was doing where he was actually looking at financial records coming out of farms in Kansas, and then with some additional surveys telling about the technologies they were using, reaching very similar conclusions with respect to efficiency gains, and also similar conclusions with respect to the people that benefited the most were people that figured out how to bundle technologies. There were no single silver bullets out there that you could identify that automatically made somebody more productive, made somebody more profitable. It was about bundling. And then the related point was the people that were, particularly in our research, the people who were benefiting the most were people that were sharing data. And so I know there was a big push for a while, a lot of paranoia about the idea of data sharing and being concerns about giving up access to your own information. It's pretty clear to us that there are tremendous benefits to sharing data. And if you're only using data from your own farm to make decisions, I think you're really limiting your ability to gain from the technology. So if you haven't made that step, I think you need to think about sharing. And then the next question is, well, who do you share with? Well, the first step is, you're going to share with people you trust, right? That might be a trusted service advisor in your community. It might be a company. And, I'm not going to tell you that I would share data with every single company that's out there, but I'd want to look at them and think about whether or not that's somebody I trust and figure out how to do that in a way that you're comfortable with. And I think you'll find that to be beneficial. So with that, let's open up for some questions. Michael.
If I may, technology certainly can be part of a long-term farm strategy, and actually can lead to better financial performance. But I want to open this up with a general question. How do you know if your strategy is working? I'll go back to something I've been doing for 30 plus years. You benchmark. What's your profit margin? How does that compare to other farms? What's your cost per bushel for corn, soybeans, and wheat? How does that compare to other farms? That's the only way I know of to really figure out whether your strategy is working. And as we all know up here, there's a lot of difference in financial performance among farms. When you talk of profit margin, it's not that unusual. If you look at profit margin over 10-year periods, you see a 20% difference between the high and the low. And so make sure you're doing that. Make sure you're benchmarking and figuring out whether your strategy is working.
Okay, as everybody rushes to the microphones to ask us questions, do you want to say a little bit, Michael, about what the Center for Commercial Ag and sort of the other offerings that we have?
Yeah, the Center for Commercial Agriculture, you can check out our website. We have a Commercial Ag Cast podcast, which all of us contribute to, and so I encourage you to check that out. We also have programs as the Top Farmer Workshop that takes place in early January in West Lafayette, so that's just an example. And all of us teach classes and conduct applied research. And so we're really focusing on those that are trying to make their living from production agriculture. And so we're trying to provide white papers, podcasts, and in-person programs to help people increase their profitability.
So if you have a question, there's 2 mics, one in each aisle. And if you would just stand up and walk to the mic, I'm sure there are some good questions out there. A very bashful audience today.
Well, I threatened the students that we would make them ask a question, but I won't put them on the spot.
You already gave them a semester grade, so you can't
you
can't threaten them with any extra points. So, all right.
I'll be the first one because my husband knows that I'm never afraid to ask stupid questions. So you bring up a great point about benchmarking prices and whatnot. I know a lot of farmers and they don't like to tell the truth, or they like to embellish how well they're doing. What's a great spot that we can look at benchmarking? All the universities have, we can go and get, price per acre kind of benchmarks from Ohio State University. But what about benchmarking standards per state, per acre, per commodity?
Well, first of all, most land-grant universities have some publications on their website related to financial analysis and financial statements. For example, I have like 20 plus publications talking about financial statements and different financial benchmarks on the Center for Commercial Agriculture. So you can certainly take a look at that. Also, most states have crop budgets. Some states have livestock budgets. You could also take a look at that. But one of the sources that I look at several sources: Kansas Farm Management Association, Farm Business Farm Management, a group over in Illinois, and then University of Minnesota FinBin. I look at all those sources, both for enterprise benchmarks and for whole farm benchmarks.
Though I think it's a great question. I also wondered, thinking about who are the people who would benefit from you sort of knowing where you stack up. And one of those people in my mind is your lender. And so if there's potential to interact with a lender and say, is there some sort of group, even like within the bank, if you work in a bank that has other producers, to try to get an idea of how do I stack up against these people that are close. And then there are sort of formal benchmarking services facilitated by land grants, but then a lot of private companies as well.
And one of the reasons why I focus quite a bit on machinery cost investment per acre and labor efficiency is, of all the costs on the farm, those 2 costs are extremely variable among farms. And so there's a lot of difference in what farms are spending in terms of their investment in machinery. and also their labor. And so that tells me you have to get a handle on those two cost centers.
One of the things that's really been surprising for me over the course of my almost 40-year career is the fact that we have these huge disparities in cost of production. Whenever you look at the financial record systems, whether it's the Kansas Farm Management Association, FBFM from Illinois, the FinBin data, there are always these big discrepancies in cost of production. So we have some people who are really low cost producers. And particularly when you think about Kansas Farm Management and FBFM, those are essentially audited records. So I have a lot of confidence in those records. There's always these big discrepancies in cost of production. So if you don't know where you're at on that continuum, you really don't have a good idea of what your problems are. And so it could be an eye opener. And sometimes it can make you uncomfortable because you might discover that your costs relative to peers are quite a bit higher than what you perhaps thought before you looked, but you need to know that. And once you know that, then you can start zoning in on, what aspect of my operation is causing me to perhaps have cost of production that's not as competitive with my neighbors and other people in the industry as I would like to be. But until you know that, you don't have that perspective. And then, Michael, you might just share, well, maybe Chad as well. You've been working on a project that I really thought was fascinating. I'm not sure exactly how far along that is at the moment, but you've been working on a project to make it a little easier to do some fairly simple financial computations where, we always talk about this. You need to have a beginning of the year balance sheet and an end of year balance sheet and an income statement. And if you have those three pieces of information in a reasonably standardized way, you can generate some of the key financial ratios that would help you do a better job of managing. And you've been working on a project to actually facilitate that. It's not quite ready for prime time, but you might share a little bit of that, what you're doing there.
The AI craze kind of bit me too. So I just wanted to understand what generative AI, so the Chat GPTs of the world, what they could potentially do for farmers. And one of the things that I can't stand is entering data. So, and as a farmer, it felt like if you wanted to keep good track of something, you had to enter data, right? You had to go into a spreadsheet and punch stuff in. So I was just searching for ways that we could simplify not entering data. And so there's a lot of these AI models that are produced by other people, and you can purchase use of those models and use them in other applications. So I used some undergrads, and we built an application to read Schedule Fs and pull all of the numbers off of a Schedule F and put them into a spreadsheet. And then if you upload simple sort of, current assets, current liabilities, total assets, total liabilities, you can get to sort of computing these ratios. The other thing is that it does it for you. So one of the things that I thought is, as I moved into a world where I'm teaching people how to do things, I would remember everything that I'm teaching. And then I realized that I Googled everything that I was doing whenever I was using it for research anyway. So instead of you having to go and look up, how do I compute this financial ratio? It tells you which numbers go in that box from what you entered, and what you should interpret this ratio to be and how you could potentially change it, and gives like simple suggestions on it. So ultimately trying to simplify the process of entering data and then using the data to try to get some sort of an insight on where you're at as a farm.
So fun project. We got a question here. Yeah, go ahead.
I have a question about autonomy. I think autonomy scares a lot of people. And you guys said that if you're paying less than $30 an hour for labor, you're not going to make money off autonomy, or it's not profitable. So where do you guys see autonomy being or coming into production ag, or where's the place for that?
Okay, so I think I'm the resident expert on that, which is terrifying. But so I worked with, this project was with a really seasoned professor who has spent most of his time in the last few years working in not large broadacre row crop systems. So working in the UK and working in other spaces in India as well. And where autonomy seems to really be working there is enabling the production of different crops that we can't do because of labor constraints. And so if you want to grow organic carrots and the big problem is weeding, if you can solve that problem by mechanical weeding or with some lasers or whatever, you can make it work. And so I think there's a part where our specific project was on these large scale machines. And again, I don't want to say that it's never going to work. It's just in the current environment and what we understand is happening, it seems like it's going to be a struggle in the near term, maybe long term it will be. But I do wonder a little bit as you think about the crops that you're growing and why you're growing them. A lot of it is we wanted to systematize sort of these, the growing of these crops, and we've got markets. I think there's potential that we could move towards sort of a more diverse crop mix, and that you could potentially do now because you're not having to hire large.
Chad, when I think about the slide you had on that, to me, it's the second component of that slide, which is autonomy allows you to farm more acres with your existing size of equipment and your existing labor pool. And, if you think about one of the machinery manufacturers here, I think had a video showing a big tractor pulling a tillage tool without anybody in the cab. In the short run, I think that's where Midwest agriculture might be headed in terms of its use of autonomy. How beneficial that's going to be to people is partly going to depend on how they price it.
Yep.
So there is some value there. The question and the struggle is going to be this trade-off between who's going to benefit, farmers or the people selling the equipment, right? And there's obviously costs associated from their side. So that's going to be one of the challenges going forward. How much do you charge for that kind of technology? That could limit its usage. It could encourage it, depending on how it's priced.
And we didn't. Our model was pretty simplistic in the idea that we made every operation be autonomous, whereas maybe there's complementary sort of things where you have, the classic example is tillage. You have multiple tillage tools running. One is autonomous, one is not. We didn't get into the nuance of that, evaluating that specific application.
We've got time for another question or perhaps two. Here we go.
On your one chart that had the green and then the dots, can you go back to that?
So the green
There
here.
you go. The one thing that I would like to see, and maybe you have it, information seekers 86% more efficient. What did it cost them to get there? Versus the passive adapters, what did it cost them? And then you on the other side, you have output bushel per acre. We can't see what that is. Do you have that data? And then we can make the assumption, is it a good thing for my operation or not?
That's a great question. So this is based on survey information. So people were self-identifying the level of productivity associated with the changes in technology that they were using. So the output bushels per acre is stylized on that vertical axis with respect to the efficiency gains. So we don't have a precise number to give you there, but it's a way for you to think about what kind of gains you might be getting from a different adoption of different technologies, right? And so it was fairly clear in the surveys that the non-adopters and the passive adopters were noticeably different from the people who were in the data users and the information seekers category. And one of the surprises for us, based on the responses we got, was the relatively small difference between data users and information seekers. And so the question is, where do you fit on that continuum? And it's a little fuzzy, right? We had to, in the terms of the research, we had to do some chopping in terms of putting people into boxes, but there's really a continuum there. And so the question is, where do you want to be on that? And what level of detail do you want to go? And what level of precision technology, for example, you want to adopt? But it gives you an idea as to how to evaluate it. So that's a great question. But the research wasn't characterized in a way where we could actually put numbers on that vertical axis, for example.
And just to comment on that non-adopters, we don't know this for sure, but in my experience, the non-adopters, what happens there is sometimes those are smaller farms and they're simply not generating enough cash once they've taken money out for owner withdrawals to have money to buy equipment that has this technology on it. And so those are probably people that are buying older machines, older technology that doesn't necessarily have that technology on it. And so even though they could gain a lot by adopting some of this technology, they could be there could be a lot of restrictions there in terms of their cash flow that would enable them to do that.
I think we are at time.
Are we done, Asa?
You are at time, but the one thing that I would mention to everybody, I think all three of you will be around for a little bit this afternoon. Sure. We do have a booth. It's 6:50 on the trade show floor, so please stop by and say hello. And if you have follow-up questions for the three faculty, they'll be around.
Thanks for coming.